In 1976, four men are having a conversation in a university in Brockport, New York. One of those men is Isaac Asimov. The questions he's being asked are absolutely ludicrous, like what is the meaning of life, etc.
Don't you think that that with changes in technology and science, that the human nature itself will be changed, altered by perhaps human beings themselves?
Asimov quickly pulls the conversation towards his work, and in his answer, we get immediate insight into what Foundation is about.
You see, when I wrote the Foundation, I wanted to consider essentially the science of psychohistory, with something I made up myself. It was, in a sense, the struggle between free will and determinism.
Asimov wrote Foundation when he was just in his 20s, which is amazing if you think about it. The best thing I wrote in my 30s was the Board Games Are Not Food song.
If you eat a meatball, it won't taste very good. 'Cause unless you are a woodlouse, board games are not food. Board games are not food.
I'm just kidding. I didn't actually write that. Elaine did. Still a lie. She didn't write it either. She plucked it out of the ether whilst she was asleep and then woke up and said to me, "You won't believe what stupid song I've been dreaming of." And I said, "We should put that in a video." The rest is history. Talking of history, if you're not familiar with Foundation, the principal idea is the retelling of the fall of the Roman Empire, but on a galactic scale. Unlike most sci-fi novels of the time, like He-Man and Fraggle Rock, Foundation does not center on a single protagonist. Instead, it tells the story in multiple generations, the characters and events of each informing the shape of the next one, which makes sense for something that's telling the story of the fall of the Roman Empire. I don't know if Asimov was the first to write a fictional novel in this way, but his was easily the most influential. Foundation is, for example, the main inspiration to Dune, or more accurately, as is always the case with Frank Herbert, he didn't like Foundation and wrote Dune as a counterpoint, which I wouldn't take too seriously because Frank Herbert didn't like anything, and his answer to all of it was always Dune. A bunch of other awesome people were inspired by Foundation, like Newt Gingrich, and also the guy whose heart goes out to you. Anywho, it wasn't just blowhards, it was also a bunch of cool people, because this generational style of storytelling became a mainstay in sci-fi. Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, Numenon by Marina J. Lostet, The Semiosis by Sue Burke, Aurora by Kim Stanley Robertson, all use this narrative frame. P.S. If you haven't read Aurora, it's so good. Generational sci-fi became its own subgenre, and I think by now some of you know where I'm going with this. Hot on the heels of their scene-stealing super hit, Root publisher Leader Games announced that it's teaming up with designer Cole Worley again for a game called Oath. The principal idea was to create a system that can be played as a standalone session, but really blooms into something if you play it as a campaign. The various power positions transferring into the next session and shifting and changing as the campaign progresses. Oath, in my opinion, was weird and unwieldy, and whilst it certainly found a niche for itself, it was not the talk of the town the way Root was. So the next collaboration between Mr. Worley and Leader Games is Arcs, a distillation of these ideas into something more tangible and approachable. I should clarify here that when I say approachable, I mean it in the sense that a burning building is more approachable than an exploding atom bomb. Instead of a sprawling campaign, Arcs takes the core premise of Oath and says there's two versions of this game: a standalone space skirmish that is risky, thorny, and spreads in an eldritch pattern that only it itself understands. But combine it with the Blighted Reach expansion and you can turn it into a free game mini-campaign that's much more elaborate and bombastic, an all-day space affair. If Root was Leader Games capturing lightning in a bottle, Arcs is them capturing an antimatter neutron star in the boot of a Fiat Punto. This slightly more sellable core premise captured the imagination of so many enthusiasts that it spawned an endless series of best game of 2024 reviews 6 months into the year, and an equal amount of denouncement, which is not at all surprising considering its unconventional approach to game design in almost every one of its aspects. It is a polarizing game, but what's exceptional is that despite being so divisive, it attracts the attention of everyone. Anecdotally, when ARX released, I decided to take a chance on a new board game club, and every week there, someone was playing ARX. Sometimes 2 tables were playing ARX. One member joked that they should rename the club to ARC Society. Looking at social media pictures of other clubs in Nottingham at the time, they too were playing ARX. In one of those game sessions, I played ARX with people who knew they would not like it, but they wanted to give it a try anyway, just to see what it was all about, to be part of the zeitgeist. I love this kind of curiosity, and I appreciate any game that engenders it, but in all my time playing ARX, almost everyone I played with either did not care for or just tacitly acknowledged its literary nature. And ARX is literary. If you doubt me, the game literally spells this out. It's called ARX, as in narrative arcs. And it's not some sci-fi double meaning referring to maybe a type of spaceship or a planet called ARX. It literally just refers to narrative arcs, the kinds you will most definitely have if you play the 3-episode mini-campaign, where each episode is called an act, 3-act structure. The game does not have rounds, it has chapters, and the fact that it draws inspiration on Asimov's Foundation is also overt. The narrative born out of play often works in parallel to some of the things that happen in Foundation, and also other sci-fi novels. And the back of the ARX box reads, "Long ago the Reach thrived, but our ancestors failed us, and I fear we're no better. As we wrestle over the galaxy's edge, can we break the cycle? Can we build something new?" That's the premise of Foundation, almost one for one. And if you're still not convinced, back when Oath was still in development, I asked Cole point blank if it was an inspiration, and he said yes, absolutely. Okay, but what does all of that mean? What are the themes and ideas behind Foundation, and how does it inform ARX within play and outside of it? This is what this video deals with, why ARX is like this. We'll review both the base game and the expansion, and whether you love this game or hate it, I hope this video will go some way towards explaining why it's producing such a polarizing effect. Fundamentally, ARX depicts conflict in space. Each player will play a faction that will build cities or spaceports on planets, gather resources, build starships, send them into fights, and try to fulfill ambitions that will score them victory points. At the end of 5 chapters, someone will have the most victory points, or power, and will win, unless of course someone triggers game end on an earlier chapter by reaching a point threshold that depends on player count. This single paragraph isn't a summary, aside from obtaining guild cards that give you special abilities and the vagaries of how you actually take actions. This is everything you do in ARX. It is stripped down, every major element clean and simple. For example, the way you get power. ARX has 5 ambitions: Tycoon, Tyrant, Warlord, Keeper, Empath. Each has a scoring condition associated with it that asks you to have the most of something at the end of the chapter. Keeper asks you to have the most relics, which is one of the game's resources. Warlord asks you to have the most trophies, which are the casualties you've collected from other players in your fights. Or in other words, have the most of something and you get victory points. Simple, right? It is in the little details that ARX's unruly vagaries emerge, culminating in something that feels alien and untamable. Not every ambition will be scored at the end of a chapter. At most, free will, but that number could potentially be 0, and how much power they'll be worth is also entirely in flux. The ambitions are basically in a superposition, impossible to predict until someone takes on the exhausting task of defining them. And here is finally the little detail that counts. The ambitions are the only way you score power. No other victory points are available. No card to give you X points for ships in fuel-producing planets. You either win the relevant ambition or you score nothing. Thus, Arx takes on the tenor of desperately clawing for diverging objectives. So let's talk about those claws, or more specifically, how you take actions. Officially, Arx is a trick-taking game, but I am a pedant, so I'll say that to be accurate, it is rather a trick game, because no taking is to be found. In Arx, you perform actions by playing action cards. The deck of these cards is composed of 4 suits, each suit featuring cards with values between 1 and 7. Each player will get dealt 6 of them at the beginning of the chapter, and that is your lot. Each suit, administration, aggression, construction, and mobilization, is associated with a grouping of the game's actions. Play an administration card, and you'll be able to tax, collecting resources from the planets where you have cities, repair, fixing up ships, cities, or shipyards damaged in previous battles, or influence, place agents on available guild cards to stake your claim for them. So what cards you've been dealt largely determines what you can do in the entire chapter, what story you can weave out of what fate bestowed you. If half of your hand is aggression cards, you know there's a good chance you'll be able to get into skirmishes with other players as they let you move and also battle. But they also let you secure, which is to take a guild card if and only if you have more agents on it than other players. But to place agents, you will remember you will need influence actions available on administration and mobilization cards. And even if your hand holds all of these, it doesn't mean that you'll be able to utilize their full potential. Things are easy if you're first player. Every card has a number of pips, and the lower the value of the card, the more pips it has. Each pip will let you perform the available action on the card once. A 2 of construction would let you build, repair, or just repair if you like. If you're the first player, if you lead, you can play any card and do anything the card lets you do. However, every subsequent player will only get the benefit of their card if they play a card of the same suit and of higher value than the first card. If you have no such card in your hand, you can copy or pivot. Copy means play any card face down. It will act as a card of the same suit as the led card. This is nifty because it lets you take actions that your cards don't normally allow, squeeze in a little bit of unexpected into fate's dealt hand, pivot away from your plans, which is ironically not what pivot lets you do. Pivot means play any card face up that does not match the led card, giving you the exact options your hand offered, but steering away from what the lead player dictated. However, both copy and pivot have one significant downside. You can only perform one action. Thus, Arx becomes less of a game where you consider your options and more of a game where you pray for your options. Looking at this game board, these planets, these spaceships, it's easy to visualize what you want to achieve. I'll build cities on fuel planets, tax them, have the most fuel, declare tycoon, and collect all of the points. But even if your hand is stuffed with construction and administration cards, which are the cards that let you do the things that you want to do, you still have to win initiative and keep maintaining it to play the cards that you want in an effective way. Initiative can be claimed by playing the highest value card of the led suit. Naturally, these high value cards have the lowest amount of pips, so they once again don't let you achieve much. You can seize initiative, and this is a rule that borders on sadism because you have to throw away one of your cards to do this without any effect. So at the end of the round, when people make their final moves, execute their grand plans to wrest away majorities for these ambitions, you will do nothing. And this is where the rules have a final laugh in your face in this trick not taking part. To declare an ambition, you have to be the lead player and play a card with a matching ambition symbol underneath. Ha ho! Finally, I can announce point scoring for the thing I will be good at. But also, you have to cover up your card's value with this 0, meaning now everyone with cards of a matching suit can surpass you and get full value from their cards, even the 1s and 2s that have the most pips. So, you declare Warlord with this aggression card, go off to battle, claim some trophies, and then other players also play their aggression cards and they have more pips than yours, do more battles, take more trophies, leaving you in the dust. Arx feels relentless in its insistence in never giving you what you want, no matter how carefully you consider your plans, no matter how much you internalize its intricacies, how much you count what cards have been played and what values are no longer available. There's still the other players wrestling with the same constraints and just as eager as you to steal those minor swings of advantage. They will ruin your best laid plans as a form of habit. It's just something they do, their natural expression. Here is a rule that is maybe the most brutal example of this. Remember guild cards? I already mentioned that you can only secure one if you have the most agents, which you place with the influence action. It's a 2-step process, but between steps 1 and 2 are other players' turns. I bid 2 agents, but on his turn, Steve bids 3. Okay, Steve. Another administration card, 2 more agents. Steve bids 3 more. And I'm beginning to reconsider my friendship as I desperately scan my cards for options. But then, a third player remembers an obscure rule called Ransack the Court, where if they attack and destroy one of my cities, they can claim any cards I had agents on and also take all those agents me and Steve placed there as trophies. And now I'm really regretting that warlord ambition I declared. Arx hits you with these exceptions, these little details that append your forward planning so consistently you start developing calluses. You stop relying on conventional methods and are always on the lookout for niche clauses. Someone's already played the 7 on a previous turn. If I play the 6, I will have initiative for sure, right? Right, wrong! Obviously, the next person in turn order will seize initiative by discarding an extra card, and the game will laugh in your face. I am making Arx sound like psychological torture, but when you do have your little victories, Arx feels oh so sweet. To actually tame this game, to do 5% of what you want to achieve, is an accomplishment that feels worthy of the punches you take. Or rather, it does to me. My first victory of Arx was far removed from my first game, but when it did come, I felt like I conquered Everest in Jupiter's gravity. I won on a tiebreaker in a free-player game, and gosh, did I feel proud of myself. I achieved this with a total of 5 guild cards taken in the entire game, each strategically deployed at just the right time to tip the scales, as opposed to the other tied player, who, I am not joking, must have secured 20 of them. But I would also be lying if I didn't say that that victory was not bittersweet. The third player in that game was the person I mentioned before, who knew they would not like Arx, but tried it for the first time anyway, and I just felt so bad about the whole thing. Let me set the scene a little more. Imagine a small room in the front of a pub. 4 other tables are full of board game players. There's maybe 20 people in there, moving, talking, playing. It is loud, oppressive. There's a heat wave happening. And here we are, huddled over a table that is testing the limits of acceptable size for a board game, trying to play something that changes states all of the time and requires continuous reappraisal. I felt like I ran a marathon. When we tallied up the scores, I know I did say I was proud of myself, but the predominant feeling that kept pulsing and pounding through all of my senses was, phew, I'm glad we're done. There's a review of Arcs on Board Game Geek titled Arcs is a Skateboard, and it's such a good title. Too good, in fact. I don't need to read that review. I get it. Arcs is a skateboard. I vibe with that completely. I get on, I grind, I lose my grip, fall, get on again, grind, trip, fall, grind, fall, get on again, trip, 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 trip. What a trip. Imagine being that person. Imagine playing this game that wants you to stumble in that environment, knowing full well you won't enjoy it. It's just not your thing. Too capricious, swingy, unpredictable, unwieldy. There will inevitably be some guy in the comments complaining that this is a criticism, explaining that I just need to play Arcs more, that once you master it, you will be a Boltzmann brain, one with the universe if the universe was Arcs. I don't know, buddy. I don't think it's a criticism to observe that some board games ask a lot of you. Dedication and perseverance as you repeatedly get battered away. One does not simply walk into Arcs, one persists through it. And that to me is neither bad or good. It simply is a take it or leave it thing. I'm less interested in the fact that Arcs is like that and more interested in why Arcs is like that. And I am going to get to that eventually. But first, just two more mechanisms. This is, after all, a game where you build cities and starships in space, so naturally at some point you will want to fling those starships at another player. This is where Arcs shows its other side, lets up, becomes permissive, joyful even. When you attack someone, for each ship you brought along, you roll one die. Blue dice are safe if you're content with not achieving much. Half the faces score a hit and half don't. You need 2 hits to take out an enemy ship, first by damaging it and then destroying it. Rolling blue simply doesn't do much unless you're picking at the scraps of a previous fight. Red dice, on the other hand, are explosive. They bring the firepower, but are equally just as likely to blow up in your face. Some results will dish out 2 damage, some will damage your own ships, and some will even activate a return volley, causing you a hit for each ship the opponent has. What's funky here is that as the attacker, you control the entire thing. You assign the damage to the enemy, to yourself, you select the dice, roll them, you experience the consequences of your hubris. The opponent's only input is to squirm. Combat in Arcs is a festival. Everyone gathers to watch. The folly of a human, erected by the flick of the wrist for folks to cheer at. You are technically in control of all of the decisions you make, even which randomizer to use. It's just that all the randomizers are somehow bad for you. So no matter what you choose, if it all goes a la Jones, it's your fault. You chose it. There is a third die, orange, that's somehow even more wild than the previous ones. You can only select orange dice if the defender has a city in the system where you are fighting. There are no results on orange dice that will damage the defender's ships, but if you roll keys on them, you can steal things from your opponent's player area, with them once again having no say in it. This is almost sacrilegious. You're not tampering with things on the board, the shared space between all players. You are invading their private area, their dashboard, and taking things for yourself with no way to stop you. You can steal their resources, and this might be important if someone's holding a resource that will be scored by an ambition, but you can also steal guild cards, the unique abilities people spend precious turns trying to accumulate. Naturally, you are very likely to blast yourself out of the sky if you attempt this, but the rewards are sometimes so great that you'll try anyway. But the orange dice hold an even crueler penalty. They never damage ships, but they might specifically damaged cities. I did mention that if you destroy a city, you get to ransack the court, nabbing a contested guild card, taking trophies in your wake, but that is a sweetener for an oh-so-severe penalty. Destroying a city means saying goodbye to all the resources you hold of the planet type you just obliterated, and all the associated guild cards with that resource, but also you permanently lose the ability to use that type of resource. Which is where you say, wait a minute, you haven't told us what the resources do. And just like combat, they are a reprieve, the breaking of a wave in the game's relentless flow. Broadly, each resource will let you perform one of the game's actions, which can be very useful when trying to execute actions that your cards just won't let you. Need to move? Spend a fuel. Secure a card? No problem, a relic will help you with that. There really is no catch aside from having to have the resource to begin with. But even here, when the game throws you a bone, it wants you to perform tricks to really earn it. There is strict timing when you can spend these resources, specifically right after you've played your card for the turn, but before you've taken any of the actions on it. This phase is called the prelude, which is strangely a musical term in this narrative space opera, never mind. And the prelude is also home to many of the abilities you'll find on your guild cards, which means that some turns you'll have outrageously explosive beginnings, entering the stage with a roaring solo, and by the time you get to the main theme, the actions from your card's pips, it feels like the show is almost over. Arx has been described as the more accessible game from the team that brought you Root and Oath, and in some ways that's true. I don't think anything I've described mechanically feels insurmountable. Play a card, do some actions, it sounds straightforward, but it never feels straightforward. It's viscous and fluid. It definitely has a flow, but it's not a flow you can control or pick up with your hands, and as anything gloopy, it really tends to clog things up when it hits a pipe. Imagine that Warlord has been declared as an ambition. Steve's been hoarding trophies from previous rounds, and he has an unraceable lead. Everybody's got ships, they're ready to fight, and they might even do it for second place, but fighting suddenly doesn't feel like a worthwhile investment. You can't catch up to this, so why run at all? Well, what else can you do? After all, it's only ambitions that score you points. You can declare your own ambition, something you're good at, but you haven't got initiative to do so, nor the high cards to secure it. You could spend 2 cards to seize initiative, but by then you're a card down, and can you even come out on top if you do it? It's not that there sometimes aren't answers, but they can be hard to fish out of the stream. The flow gets interrupted, gummed up until people reestablish what their aims are. Or maybe they can't. Maybe they're just that far behind. And towards the end, Arx won't let you tell your story, even if it's a story of loss. All you can do is float. But also, if you look back at that example I just made, you could tell that there's a rhythm to how you think about the game. It takes a few plays to internalize the sub-rules to the main rules, all the little exceptions, but when you do, you can see that not a single one is superfluous. It's trimmed and chopped so precisely and purposefully. If you're in your first plays of Arx and you feel like someone just hoodwinked you with some obscure clause like ransack the court, don't know why I keep coming back to that one, you will find reason for it soon enough. It all interconnects within a system, within a meta, within that flow, gummy or wild, and you can catch that flow, that wave, and ride it. Arx is a surfboard. Can I get away with that? I think I can get away with that. You know, live versions of songs, it's this thing we had in the 90s. Ask your parents. One live version I really like is Laura Marling's medley from Once I Was an Eagle, played with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra. It's a suite of 4 songs played as one, centering on relationships, independence, survival, defiance, and personal strength. There is a verve in her performance. To this day, I struggle to find a match for it. It's raw, angry, and determined. Stoic, if you like, which I don't, nasty little word. In the chorus, she declares,
When we were in love, I was an eagle, and you were a dove.
On YouTube, the comment section. Imagine waking up to that woman or hearing her sing about the house. She's an angel. My dude, please, the lyrics are, I was an eagle, not a canary. Laura sings,
I am not some victim of romance.
on YouTube, the comment section. I love this. It's like some romantic female neurotic songwriting, but the sounds are so energetic. She tapped into something. Listen, I know it's a bit of a cliche talking about the general level of media literacy, but I needed to establish a baseline. I mean, this is music we're talking about. Music's been around longer than books. We should have figured this out by now. And Laura's lyrics aren't particularly hard to follow along. There's depth and nuance, but the overall motifs are pretty evident. Now imagine the general audiences employing their YouTube comment media analysis skills towards a board game. There's a whole host of new barriers. First, we don't expect board games to have narrower themes because some of them are Bonanza or Happy Salmon or Sausage Sizzle. Second, board games are a lot less overt. You can't Google the lyrics. You have to already be smoking what the designer cooked up. You gotta read the designer diaries and interviews. You don't always pick up on the motifs from just play. So here's Arcs, which on its surface, a space game. And just those two words alone conjure a whole host of, I'm sorry for using this word, mimetics. If I say space game, then we're immediately working in a very specific genre, and in the realm of board games, that means inbuilt expectations, prejudices, assumptions. But what happens when your game is a deliberate play on the genre? When you want to take all those tropes and memes that everyone is used to and subvert them. You get the Arcs Kickstarter campaign. On May 4th, 2023, about a year after its Kickstarter campaign concluded, but a year before it was released, Leader Games posted an update called Design Update and Map Reveal. These updates got anywhere between 1 and 30 comments, but not this one. This got 156 comments, plus a BGG thread discussing the update with 208 comments. I wonder why the map reveal. Oh, they removed the hexagons. The hexagons! Board gamers lost the hexagons and everyone was mad. I don't want to shame people, so okay, that's a lie. I really do want to shame people, but I won't. So I'm not going to read any of those comments out, but I will leave links in the description. Indulge yourselves in your spare time. I will also summarize. The general upset emerged with a new map design. When Arcs launched on Kickstarter, the map looked like this. Much hexagon, very space. The new map, however, as you can see, no more hexagon. You will also note that this new map does not look like the Arcs map we have now, except it is the same map. Artistically, what they revealed was a prototype. Functionally, this is the same thing. Some people were just directly upset that there's no more hexagons, but most expressed that it wasn't particularly the absence of six-pointed shapes, but the feeling of the game being set in space gone. If it's not the hexagons, what is it about the map that evokes the sense of space? If I had to guess, the old map had a texture of a space game, something that spoke the language of astronomical conflict built on every previous member of the genre. It was in a familiar neighborhood. This, on the other hand, speaks of abstraction. Obviously, the team at Leader Games made this new map because it worked better for the game they were designing. The sensible thing for a designer to do is to adapt the form to suit the function, but form speaks tone to players, and when they saw this and realized that the space game from the designer of Root wasn't going to be bashing each other's spaceships until they give up and make kissy noises affair, it felt like a betrayal. I know I spent a large portion of this video talking about a Kickstarter update and a stupid non-controversy, and also Laura Marling, but I find this conflict of expectation versus realization at the core of how people talk about arcs. On one axis, we have an audience, part of which isn't ready or doesn't know how to apply media literacy. On the second axis, we have hype, and on the third, we have genre convention and expectations. At the center of all of this is Arcs, a game that was deliberately designed as a conversation and subversion of all these things. That Kickstarter update did explode, but the fuse was lit before anyone even approached it. Asimov's Foundation did not want to be the sci-fi novel everyone expected, where Billy Lasers, armed hooked around his girlfriend, saves the galaxy. It messed with genre convention by having no central protagonist or a linear narrative. It's unclear how much of this is intentional from the get-go. What eventually became Foundation, the novel, was initially serialized short stories published in the Astounding Science Fiction magazine. The central plot revolves around a crumbling galactic empire and a genius scientist named Harry Seldon, who invents a pinprick accurate prognostication system called psychohistory. It cannot predict what will happen to you tomorrow, but it can accurately estimate what tomorrow's news will be, or the news hundreds of years into the future. On a societal level, it's faultless. Seldon knows the empire is dying, and he knows he cannot save it, but he can shorten the span of chaos until a new ruling system emerges. In the remote edge of the galaxy, he sets up the foundation, the basis for a new empire, and then with his plan set in motion, he dies. Each chapter, nay arc of Foundation deals with a new generation and a new crisis. It centers on new characters who are sometimes related to the old ones, and past events inform their motivations and perspectives. For individual short stories, this is a brilliant little way of interconnecting them, but put them all together into a novel, and reading Foundation is like reading a history book. Past events establish cause, and future events describe the effect, and the daisy chain keeps looping. Generational storytelling has largely remained in the realms of books because adapting it for movies or TV is incredibly challenging. Applied as is, you would have to constantly rotate actors and sets. It would be so expensive. The TV adaptation of Foundation itself, produced by Apple, had to figure out a way to rework the story so it could have a central protagonist and a system of eternal emperors played by the same actors. But it just so happens that a lack of a central protagonist or a constantly evolving set piece isn't really an issue for board games. By now, the release of Arcs is a year behind, and the conversation has settled into an agreement. Arcs' base game is a cutthroat, abstract affair that doesn't have scope for storytelling, and the thematic elements emerge once you play the Blighted Reach expansion. It's not that I think this is untrue, but I do think this consensus minimizes everything that Arcs is achieving. You'll notice that I've described the form and function and narrative of Foundation, but I haven't really touched on what it's about. The plot is the fall of empires, but how do they fall? Why do they fall? What does Foundation have to say about it? We will get to this eventually, but for the purposes of the base game of Arcs, it isn't really relevant. Just like Foundation is a subversion of sci-fi space opera in the 40s, sans Blighted Reach Arcs is a subversion of tropes and genre conventions of space-themed board games. Take Twilight Imperium or Eclipse and Gaia Project. If you isolate these two games to just the sphere of board gaming, despite both being set in space, they belong to diametrically opposed genres. But if you consider the narrative journey, what each player undergoes, there isn't that much of a difference. Each person controls a small zone and a small fleet at the start. You expand into new territories, exploit them for resources, explore random events, and exterminate by fighting other players. The 4 X's! I did not enjoy dating Exterminate. But what is the actual narrative journey as a player? What do? You move and grow and fight. Sometimes you don't even move, just hunker down. Sometimes you don't fight, just grow like a corrupted cell. My story is that I'm a turtle that's getting bigger. Riveting stuff. If you put that in a novel, nothing is happening. There's 4, maybe 6 factions. They have different characteristics and maybe they go about things in different ways, but none of them actually do anything interesting or different from each other. Neither is to root for because all of them are equally protagonists. It's just that you're playing one of them, so you see them as the protagonist. But everyone else at the table sees their protagonist as the protagonist. Narrative-wise, it's a mess, and it doesn't make any sense. It's just board game conventions and tropes that we've become so desensitized to, they're like an IKEA lampshade. We don't even notice them. But when the design team at Leader Games comes into your house and starts redecorating things how they see fit, suddenly the absence of that lampshade becomes very evident. Sci-fi novels, even tropey ones, have evolved far past Billy Lasers. They have multiple characters with their own flaws and struggles, their own agendas. Sometimes they work in tandem, sometimes in opposition. A good prototype for this is the Expand series, but honestly, throw a stone in any direction and you'll hit a modern speculative fiction book with similar beats. The way ARX models this within its own ecosystem is through that changing initiative. To be first player is to dictate the flow of the story. Your character takes center stage. In my very first game of ARX, I acquired the Fuel Cartel Guild card. When I own it, any fuel that isn't claimed by players sits near my player board. If someone declared the Tycoon ambition, all of that fuel would count as owned by me. On the face of it, it is a simple card to counter. Produce fuel to dwindle the supply. A basic collusion between all other players would quickly undermine any advantage this card gave me. But what if the majority of fuel-producing planets were owned by me? That would mean that no one else can make fuel, which would mean that declaring Tycoon is basically giving me 3 points. No one's declaring Tycoon unless it's me. I have to do it. To do anything meaningful in ARX, such as declaring an ambition, you have to give up the power, pass the baton to someone else who in turn will lead the story in their way. In narrative terms, an ambition is instigating a conflict and thus redirecting the flow of the plot. When I declare Tycoon, I say the conflict of the story is who has the most fuel and material, and I, the fuel cartel that's been hoarding the supply, am the villain. I no longer have the initiative. It is now another player's turn to lead. Will they attack my fuel cities? Will they raid my fuel cartel card? Will they focus on something entirely different? That is their story to tell. You can even call an agenda as a misdirection. Focus everyone's attention elsewhere to instead machinate secret plots. What if I, the owner of Fuel Cartel, call a different agenda? Maybe Warlord, as I've got a few trophies and it's something I could plausibly be fighting for. But what I'm actually doing is securing the Fuel Stranglehold for future rounds where agendas score more points. I'm recruiting loyal guardians to my court, making sure no one can steal my agenda. I'm building ships to reinforce my defenses, and I'm making sure I can hold initiative at the start of the next round. To fool everyone via sleight of hand in a game that some uncharitably describe as too abstract, I can't imagine better narrative payoff. These are things that will happen in other space games too, especially the more interactive ones, but ARX has it hard-coded into its system. It's a primary function of what it does. We've all seen a sitcom episode, or 5, where an overambitious lead decided to stage a play, but he's working with bad actors. Frasier did it, so did Frankie and Grace, and so on. The director has a dream, a vision, but neither the budget, nor the experience, nor the cast to make it happen. And rather than making do, they burn all the bridges instead. Every player in ARX is a member of the cast, and for it to sing, to flow, to feel like an actual story, everyone needs to be at the top of their game, to know how to react and to respond to one another. A film, a book, a play can deal with a weak actor or a dull character, and so can ARX. But when the spotlight's on them, and they're floundering, the whole thing drags. This is not, under any circumstances, an indictment of bad play or poor strategizing. In ARX, we're all bad actors because we're an amateur community group being led by Stanley Kubrick. As an audience, we're not conditioned to expect ARX. We're still upset about the lack of hexagons, even though, if you think about it, what's hexagonal about space? Isn't it a lot more space-like to have pockets of activity that you have to teleport to and from, because otherwise the distances are too great and literally nebulous. And the thing about Kubrick is he does not like to share control, and as we established earlier, neither does Cole Worley, which from a storytelling perspective makes sense. To craft a game with multiple points of view where you pass the baton of featured character back and forth, well, sacrifices have to be made. I've misdirected everyone. I've built my defenses. I've got loyal guardians. No one can stop the fuel cartel, except in the round where it matters. In the round where I've built my strategy around, not a single card in my hand lets me declare Tycoon, foiled by a bad draw or foiled by hubris, bureaucracy, by too many eggs in a single basket. This is a story. You underwent a journey. You're the character at the end of the novel who was too greedy, and you got your comeuppance without much input from the other players. You feel what they feel, and it's probably not a good feeling, but to take it too seriously is to lean into your character too much. In Foundation's third arc, The Mayors, the story's perspective centers on Salvo Hardin, an aging mayor of Terminus, the planet where the Foundation is based. He was already a pivotal character in one crisis and has learned that Harry Seldon's plan, based on psychohistory, does not need much lubrication. Throughout the story, we see Hardin do barely anything as neighboring polities who have military superiority threaten to swallow Terminus whole, and political pressure from the inside is threatening to oust him from his ruling position. He is a man that knows how this goes. He's lived it. He's seen psychohistory in action and realizes that psychohistory does not account for individual behavior, just how it will all play out in macro scale. So he can't do anything to change the future's course, which worries him little because the future has been accounted in Foundation's favor. He only needs to make sure that he's on top when the winds blow over, and to do that, he simply needs to predict how the dominoes will fall. The villains of the story were always going to lose, and the hero didn't even need to lift a finger. Sound familiar? A common criticism of ARX and other games that feature the name Cole Worley on the box is lack of agency. I know what I want to do, but the cards in my hand, the board state, the asymmetry, or whatever else, it slipped through the cracks, fell through my fingers.
It was, in a sense, a struggle between free will and determinism.
This is why there is a vision here, a curated experience. A friend of mine compared ARX to a tasting menu. You're at the whims of your chef. You've got no say in what you're eating. 18 courses served on a surfboard. I wouldn't want it any other way. Hello, and welcome to my blighty ox shed. Don't mind that, that's just... Listen, we're gonna do this chapter shed style. There'll be garden noises, dogs barking, maybe a lawnmower. It's part of the vibe, just roll with it. Everything that Blighted Reach does is an amplification. The things that are good about arcs, there's more of it, way more. You like Kyle Ferrin's artwork? Well, Blighted Reach has some of his weirdest, best work. What about this fella who has a black hole for a head? Do you want to be this fella? Do you want to trap light and be an absence of time and space? You can do it. You can be him, but just with your head, not your body. Your body is not a singularity, your head is. Why does your body not fall into your head? Because it's frozen in time at the event horizon, you dum-dum. It's only there from our perspective. That's science for you. And naturally, the things that made me and are exacerbated to exhausting levels, exhuming those feelings of uncertainty and exposing them for us to re-examine. That's 5 X's, how about that? I've mentioned that the Blighted Reach expansion, 6 X's, turns arcs into a 3-episode campaign, each game building and following from the previous one. I want you to kind of sit with that thought and consider what an absurd achievement it is by itself. In the year of our Lord Eugene Hutt's 2025, board game expansions are mostly these discarded ideas bolted together in an add-on package that launches simultaneously with the main game. An upsell gimmick. Well, Blighted Reach also launched simultaneously with arcs, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that by its sheer existence, it defies the current scene. It's a statement. Look at what an expansion could be, should be. It's not coincidental that the Blighted Reach box is more than twice the size of the original game. Part of that is because you can store all of arcs inside, but also because it feels like it's more than twice the game. I'm going to try to do something different. Instead of talking about all the new concepts it introduces piecemeal, I'll discuss this expansion by act. Each of the 3 games in this mini-campaign is called an act, and each act has a different tone and feel delivered by the virtue of fates. When you begin a Blighted Reach campaign, each player will be dealt a choice of 2 fates. Whereas base game arcs, BGA from now on, was symmetric at the start, meaning everyone's playing with identical starting rules, fates give you a unique narrative and rules twist, a purpose to exist in this universe. The premise of Blighted Reach arcs, BRA from now on, is the same as BGA's. The empire is crumbling, the galaxy is splintering, and now there's 3 states all across the board, and also blight, represented by these chompy mushroom tokens. In Blighted Reach, mushroom eat you! Here's some Eugene Hutts for you. Or David Harper, maybe. Imagine Europe circa 2016. These purple ships, the imperial color, represent Britain, its once great reach reduced to 2 out of the 6 clusters. All across the board, there's 3 states, that would be the rest of Europe. And also, in this analogy, let's not discuss what the blight represents, because it wouldn't be good. This is an imperial perspective, and you'll start as imperial regions, although the power to secede from the empire is very much achievable. One of you will also be the first region, the banker and policymaker for the carry-on corps of royalty. That's kind of the setup, and I'll talk about what all of these things mean a bit later, but I want to pull your focus back onto fates, because it is through the fates that BRA operates. So, I've been dealt 2 fates, Admiral and Founder. Every player picks their fate by selecting the fate card and putting it on the table face down, and then revealing it. A simple rule. Absolutely pivotal. How effective your fate will be depends so much on what fates the other players are playing, because instead of the razor-sharp aggression of BGA, Blighted Reach elasticates the play space into an environment that's much more friendly for you to poodle around, with one big caveat that we'll get to in Act 3. Let's take a closer look at our choices. Admiral grants us an immense benefit, but to explain it, I need to explain how the Empire works in general. These honking purple ships don't bring any significant increase in blasting capabilities, but they make up for it in authority. Any location that has an undamaged Imperial ship is automatically controlled by the Empire. Great news for subjects of the state, bad news for anyone else. Generally, any player who is a Imperial regent can extend that control to themselves, but only on their turn and only if they have one of their own ships in that location. This is important for things like taxing resources, which, reminder, are good because they let us take extra actions, but also let us win ambitions like Tycoon, Keeper, and so on. If I really need a relic, I can, as a regent, take one Imperial ship with me for every ship I move and move it into any relic planet. It does not matter who has what ships there or whose city it is, as long as it's my turn. Because of that Imperial ship, I control it and can tax the city and even nab a captive if the city belongs to another player. Admiral lets me ignore a lot of restrictions related to the Empire. Remember how I said I needed one of my own ships to borrow the Imperial control? Well, Admiral grants me a guild card called Imperial Officers. Now I just control everything the Empire controls. I can also move ships without the assistance of my own. Finally, it makes me first regent, which lets me control which Imperial policies will be enacted every time we execute this little booklet called Edicts. One of those policies is to have more ships. In the words of Yoshi, yabba dabba doo! This fate gives me everything! What's the downside? Well, couple of caveats. Imperial Officers is a guild card, a special one that cannot be raided or stolen via normal means. Emphasis on normal means because BRA operates on a constant barrage of exceptions. Normal is in fact abnormal. If Advocate is in play, in later acts they'll gain the ability to maybe not exactly steal Imperial Officers, but extort me endlessly for it. Also, I can still lose Imperial Officers if I provoke outrage with a weapons planet. And whilst I shouldn't choose to do it myself, there are ways it can happen unwillingly. A lot of my power is concentrated in one card, and losing it would be less of an admiral and more of an ornament. Second, I will only be first regent if no one else chooses the steward fate. Otherwise, the steward gets the honor, and in a 4-player game it is guaranteed that someone else has that fate option. I mentioned this booklet already, so let's take a look at how it works. At the beginning of any ARCS campaign, we'll stick a special Imperial Edict here that's made up of 3 parts. Anytime we execute edicts, First Regent will get to either enforce the current one on top or choose a different one. These let me do various things like collect ties from other regions and store them on the special tile, score extra victory points, and, crucially, add more Imperial ships to the map. The second thing the Admiral Fate does is actually add its own edict, use Imperial Foundries, which lets the owner of Imperial Officers replace your own ships with Imperial ships. This way, Fates weave a rules tapestry that shapes the course of the campaign, leaving a permanent impact on the galaxy, even if they leave play. You've probably picked up that I put emphasis on Imperial ships when discussing the Admiral, so let's unpack the final element of Fates. In the first act, each Fate brings with it an objective, something you need to achieve to keep playing it in future acts. The objective is placed on the points track, and each Fate will provide different values. In the Admiral's case, we place it on 13. My job is to lower this down to 0. If I can't, I must swap fates at the end of this act and possibly add more consequences to the campaign state. What I do to lower it is also highly specific to each fate. Each time anyone places an Imperial ship on the map, I move it down by 1, but if and only if I am in the lead for a declared ambition. Also, if I attack things with Imperial ships and take trophies, whether it was other player ships or cities or even these chompy mushrooms, I take it down by 1 again. My ability to evolve my fate is highly dependent on me having a say on these edicts because it's a primary way for me to deploy more Imperial ships and advance my objective. Otherwise, I have to sacrifice my own ships to do it, which is obviously not ideal. So if the steward fate is in play, well, good, that's someone else interested in advancing the Imperial cause. But also bad because they're in charge and I have to cajole them into building more Imperial ships, which doesn't really go against their objective, but isn't necessarily a massive boon either. What I want you to consider is that all of this is going through my head before I even started play. I'm just choosing my fate, and I haven't even touched on my second choice. Once the initial shock of just how expansive Blighted Reach feels in comparison to Arcs wears off, the natural question is, why? What are all these mechanisms for? Well, to fulfill the remit of campaign game, naturally. But how do they achieve that? The asymmetry of fates, their inherent gumption, gives the game thematic texture and toys to play around. But BGA itself does not have the scope for it. It's too raw, too clinical and sharp to have room for these flourishes. To make free, consecutive, evolving games of Arcs work as a concept, we need room for people to breathe and tinker with these ideas. I hesitate to call a mechanism genius. Okay, that's a lie. I do it at least once a video. But hot dang, this one's a banger. At the end of Acts 1 and 2, each player's victory point score is halved. Whatever you earned in Act 1, this will effectively be quartered, meaning that victory points should not and are not the driving force in this equation. Instead, it is these objectives and other flourishes that fill that void, allowing for play that's much less organic, but more relaxed. To put it in plain terms, for the first two acts, Blighted Reach lets people poodle and do fun things with their asymmetries. Let's take a look at our other fate option, the Founder. I get one card, that's it. It's called Parade Fleets, and if you're sensing a bit of a red vibe coming off of it, just wait till Act 2. When the Founder declares an ambition, they get 2 fresh ships anywhere there's a free city. A simple ability for a simple dictator. One hitch. My objective basically demands I leave the Empire and become an outlaw, losing all access to those cushy benefits like system control via Imperial ships. And again, there's that thread of interaction between all of the fates. The Founder has friction with the Admiral because they're likely to attack Imperial ships. The Admiral has friction with the Steward for control of the Empire. The Steward has a strange relationship with the Advocate, and so on. All of these tension points are invitations to negotiate, align goals with other players. Something unthinkable in BGA manifests in these little design nudges. It's much less overt than in games like Twilight Imperium, where negotiation is at the core of play, because if you have that Arcs muscle memory, you might not feel that there's space for it exists. But ask other players if they want to collude on something, and you might be surprised at the result. To facilitate this, BRA introduces a new currency, Favor. To explain Favor, some more rules. In addition to guild cards, the court also has Vox cards and the Imperial Council card, which never leaves the court. Just like with guild cards, you can use the influence action to place agents on them, and then later secure them if you have more agents than anyone else. If you secure the Imperial Council, you will have the option to call a summit. This is where you can make strictly codified deals. For example, if you ask someone, you can exchange one of their ships with one of your own, or you can swap resources. Nifty. I picked up 2 identical resources, but I don't think it matters, you get the point. But you can also, almost like a promissory note, hand out favor. Hey, I'd really love to have a ship on this gate, make my travel easy. How about I swap your ship for my ship? Oh, you want something in return? How about I give you a favor? If you're the person who called the summit, you can spend that favor to force other players into taking these negotiation actions without benefit to themselves. It is such a ridiculous tension and discomfort inducing mechanism. Owing someone favor means that at any point they could cash it in and hurt you in any number of ways. But also, You did this to yourself. Past you, yes, that head really needed things and wantonly took them. Future you will pay the price, but current you is suffering the ludological equivalent of holding it in when they really need to go. If you call the council, you also get to do a number of other little things, like if you're an outlaw, you can steal from the first region tile, but your big choice is to decide whether you'll do edicts or a crisis. I've explained edicts already. Crisis is where those Vox cards come in. If you place agents on a Vox card and then secure it, you'll get a one-off effect, something nice for you, dubious for everyone else. For example, if you secure populist demands, you may declare an ambition without going through the whole be first player and make your card a 0 rigmarole. However, when you resolve a crisis, any unclaimed Vox cards hit everyone with weird and mostly unwelcome effects. In the populist demands example, we undeclare an ambition, and that could have pretty severe consequences. And the final part of this crisis is blight. Remember the chompy mushrooms I've been mostly ignoring in this review? Well, meanwhile, they've been multiplying, and now they're gonna hit everyone's ships. It's Act 1 still, things are not so bad. All the blight is damaged, so everyone's ships take 1 damage. Unless you're in a planet with Imperial ships, in that case, it's the Imperial ships that take 1 damage. But if you ignore them, they'll heal up, becoming harder to remove and with a much nastier bite. In summary, there is a lot to do. Objectives to be fulfilled, Vox cards dealt with, blight removed, negotiations to be done, and let's not forget, we want to secure some guild cards because they give us more nifty special abilities and persist to future acts. We want to sculpt our faction, shape it for machinations when the clash comes to its inevitable fruition. Act 1 is the rise of the hero, the power fantasy full force endemic to many games of this genre, but still in the mold of that hard to wrangle system of trick not taking, where you have no guarantee to take the actions you want and control often slips out of your hands. Act 2 is the inevitable complication. You succeeded or failed. Now come the consequences. If you manage to achieve your fate's objective, you'll usually get something in return. If I'm playing the Founder, I get the ability to build free cities and a nifty way to clear outrage. Cool! Also, some political intrigue Vox cards get shuffled into the court deck. These are going to inject some favor exchanges between players. That's not a direct benefit to me, it's just Blighted Reach hitting puberty. Your campaign is going through changes. None of that happens if you fail. Instead, you have to add Construction Union and Admin Union to the court deck. Your upstart socialist state combusted, but from its ashes, there's unions now, and someone might get to control them. Finally, because you failed, you can no longer proceed with your fate, and you must choose a new one. The fates on offer at the start are not the ones you'll be choosing from. Instead, a whole set of new 8 fates, the B fates, become your choice. Even if you did succeed, you'll still get a choice of 1 B fate if you're not feeling in sync with your starting selection. A chance to pivot towards something that feels more right. If you do continue with your A fate, you'll get a new objective and more complications. Again, the Founder is a great example of this, introducing a whole new subsystem called the Commonwealth, which now everyone is suddenly a member of. The Founder also gets to nominate an ambition as a Commonwealth ambition, meaning that everyone in the Commonwealth contributes to it and also score it together and split the power evenly. Communism! This is such a great ability because any player can pretty much leave the Commonwealth permanently at any time. They don't get even splitsies anymore, but if they win a Commonwealth ambition against the Commonwealth, they double the score. To put that in practice, if you know you'll lose an ambition, you can always declare it and make it a Commonwealth ambition. If you have many members, It's you getting points from other people's work. But if you abuse this ability, people will just get annoyed and leave. That is a tremendously funny and sometimes frustrating thing to experience. But Act 2 is also where the glut of rules starts to wobble this cosmic wheelbarrow. Half the B-Fates introduce the concept of flagships. If you adopt one of these, you remove all the cities and spaceports on the map and replace them with a single traveling megastructure. You also get a second player board where you then build the cities and spaceports into upgrading its various systems. It's a whole new mechanism with intricacies and complications that everyone has to internalize, even if they're not playing it, because to deal with other players, to affect them in ways that are beneficial to you, you have to understand how all of these systems work. Too much is a phrase that has different thresholds for different people. Flagships triggered that threshold for me. In all my plays of Blighted Reach, I avoided flagships like the plague, seeing them as an unnecessary complication of rules for a style flair. In fact, B-Fates themselves I have little experience with, because as long as you have a good handle on arcs, completing your A-Fate objective isn't necessarily a guarantee, but it is likely achievable, and it's oh so tempting to see where that thread leads you rather than taking a hard pivot 1/3 into the game. Flagships aren't the only thing that I felt like was too much. Oftentimes I found the entire rule set of Blighted Reach overbearing, not to understand, not to handle, but to put it into practice. I quite like the Arcs rulebook, but the Blighted Reach rulebook is maybe just the most annoying thing I had to grapple with. BGA relies on an innate understanding of intricate systems, a single codified word that belies a lot of meaning. Loyal means any piece that is specifically your color. Planet means board space where it's possible to build buildings. Gate is one of these locations around the board. Cluster is a grouping of free planets and a gate, and so on. This is just a smattering. There are terms galore, and when isolated to just arcs, it creates a lean way to convey a lot of mechanical concepts via a one-word shortcut. BRA introduces another bucket full of these terms, and then it relies on your memory of past terms to explain new ones. These rules words then become compound rules words, and I felt my brain become a sieve. What is the difference between triggering a summit between the Imperial Council card and an event card? They have overlapping steps, but also different ones. It's like looking at those spot the difference pictures. You have to take a moment until you realize that the dog on the left has no nose. Every complex game has an innate problem. For people to engage with play elements, they first have to develop a clear understanding of the mechanisms. Thus, your first plays are just fumbles as you go. So, how does this work exactly? You're not playing the game, you're just learning to play the game. Blighted Reach exacerbates this problem by creating a system that relies on two separate rulebooks, one of which will often ask you to then go back to the other. I just realized that I picked these up upside down, but pretend that they're not and that I'm cool. But then it also wants to introduce rules exclusive to how fates develop via little cards in your fate deck. So, everyone is in the Commonwealth now. What does that mean for their imperial status? Do they just automatically get kicked out of the empire? Do they become an outlaw? Or is this a separate third faction? Neither of those. They retain their previous status and benefits. They're Imperial and Commonwealth, or Outlaw and Commonwealth. It is sort of explained via omission of any rules relating to it. No one told you to leave the Empire. But logically, is it unlikely to assume that you belong to a single political faction rather than multiple ones simultaneously? I wish that there was an in-depth A4 sheet for every fate, answering frequently asked questions and explaining concepts in more depth, offering guidance and shining a light on rules nuance. Blighted Reach wants you to discover these things organically to the point of punishing you sometimes. If you pick Partisan at the beginning of the campaign, you get the ability to seize initiative by outraging planets, a hefty cost for a good benefit as long as it's well timed. At no point does it tell you that you'll really struggle in Act 2 as the Partisan if you don't prepare by outraging a few types of planets in Act 1. You have to discover that for yourself by running straight into a brick wall, which I don't mind. BRA is never punishing enough to hold failure against you, but all of that together makes it a hard experience to get into if you're not just so excited for the whole thing. I am, and I'm cool about it, but convincing friends to learn arcs, to play arcs, and then understand arcs, to then play Blighted Reach, understand Blighted Reach. It's taken me so many words to just shine a light on these systems, never mind critique them, to then have a fate tell a player in Act 2, wait, no, you've done it wrong. It's a bold move, and to finish this millennial reference, in my time with Blighted Reach, it doesn't always pay off. At its worst, Blighted Reach can feel a bit like a shed design, hence the decor. Whatever rules we're laying around to make a concept work, that's what we'll use, and we'll apply as much duct tape as necessary to hold it together. But that is also its strength. Stare into this contraption long enough and you will see genius, how these cumbersome systems create play experiences like no other. There's more ideas here than first meets the eye, and more reason to its eclectic rhyme than you imagine. Just like Act 1, Act 2 uses its time to remove friction, invite people to explore these ideas, not worrying so much about the victory of it all. The playtime is truncated in both acts, reducing the staple 5 chapters of BGA into a sleek 3, an arc that feels very fit for arcs. Act 3 extends that time into 4 chapters, but it can and frequently will end sooner as the spaces are now removed and we return to the paper-cut sharp confrontation that Arcs is famous for. If you manage to keep your fate in Act 2, you arrive at grand ambitions, scoring conditions exclusive to you that no one else gets to partake in. As far as I can tell, this is the only time Arcs lets you score power via other means than ambitions, and it's appropriate given that this is the culmination of everything. If you didn't manage to keep your fate, or you just felt like throwing caution to the wind, you can opt for a C fate, a last-minute complication for everyone else. A C fate does not need victory points to win, it just needs to achieve its new objective. Soon as it does, victory is theirs. Unless, of course, multiple C fates achieve their objective at the same time, then it's back to whoever has the most power out of the tying players. Every spacer that created those cushy barriers for people to poodle has been catapulted out in an instant. Both victory conditions are a combined signal that the gloves are off and we're about to fight until our last breath. When people talk about Blighted Reach, a frequent remark is that this expansion is so different from Arcs, it might as well be a new game. I understand where this impulse comes from, but I think in nuance, it's not quite true. It's not that Blighted Reach is whole new clay slopped onto the carcass of Arcs. It's that Blighted Reach is extra game added at the beginning, but the arrival, the crescendo of Act 3 is that same game of BGA with a game state that is unique, complex, and born out of many hours of interaction between various mechanical ideas. Behold my true form, Arcs proclaims, and the grandiose grotesqueness of the monster we all created together emerges. At this stage, it is impossible not to fall in love with it, even if you hate it. I imagine your feelings towards Arcs are more complex than you let on, because the totality of everything you've been doing has been accounted, and you can no longer say that things were out of your control. Fate is sometimes fickle, and not everything was down to you, but the broad strokes, the big choices, that's always been you. Blighted Reach is a mirror, and you're looking right at it. We're easily an hour into this video, and I have an admission to make. I never actually played Arcs. No, I'm just kidding. Wouldn't it be funny though? Anyway, I don't like Foundation. I mean, sure, when I was 12 years old, it uncorked something in my brain. Stuff started leaking out, but there was no way to seal the plug back in anymore. It was like everything I understood got expanded somehow. Don't think there's anything else in the world that can do that. When it was published, it was absolutely revolutionary, and some of it still stands up, but I'm nearly 42 now, and when I look at Foundation, all I see is a story about corruption built on inbred bureaucracy, defeated by belief in science and men who cut through the bullshit and disrupt things. Let's look at how that idea has been working in practice.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
Oh, well, never mind then, moving on. Remember in the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Frank Herbert wasn't a fan either. He wrote the Bene Gesserit, a mystic cult socio-engineering the future via means of genetic manipulation, as a criticism of Foundation, a more realistic depiction of how that sort of thing would play out. I don't agree with Frank Herbert on much of anything, but I gotta say, the guy had a point. Also, conceptually, this book is just weird. Empire is bad and will fail, and we will fight it by shortening the time it takes to bring back our own empire. It cannot decide whether it wants to challenge or be the status quo, which I imagine is a lot like being a member of the band Status Quo. Where I feel Foundation has a lasting impact is in its form rather than narrative, and even there, it's the legacy of Foundation that's more important than Foundation itself. There is something powerful in the ability to zoom out in time, to see the totality on a grander scale than an individual human experience. If you've never read Foundation, my advice would be to continue not reading it. It's the whole Citizen Kane thing. You're much better off picking up a more current novel that's built on this form. I've listed some books earlier, here's some more. Cloud Atlas, Under the Eye of the Big Bird, Dark Eden, and Arcs the Blighted Reach expansion. If I had to work hard to draw parallels between Foundation and Arcs in Chapter 3, with Blighted Reach, I don't even have to lift a finger. The setup of BRA does the work for me with a dwindling empire, the galaxy converting into free states. One of the fates is even called Founder and asks you to basically set up a new form of government from the ashes of the old one. The inspiration is there, writ large, a tag spray painted over the canvas. But Foundation is a prescriptive narrative. Not only do you have no say in it, but metafictionally, neither do its characters. Their fates are bound to Harry Seldon's psychohistory. In Blighted Reach, your fate is for you to choose multiple times. Whether it is dis or jointed, that's up in the air. Games are just like that sometimes. In one Blighted Reach campaign, I did play as the Founder. In Act 1, I abandoned the Empire as soon as I could. In Act 2, I alienated everyone from the Commonwealth by being too bullish about the new communist nature of agendas. And despite fulfilling my objective, in Act 3, I pivoted to a sea fate. Partly because I felt like, given the board state, my chances of winning were better if I didn't stick with the Founder, but largely because I was dealt Guardian as my sea fate. Guardian is a conservationist fate. The premise is that you've become too conscious of exploitation and decide to take it upon yourself to end the use of fuel and material. Mechanically, it plays out like this. You win by successfully blockading fuel and material planets. You can't use them yourself anymore because you pissed off all of the magnets with those blockades. Instead, when you tax fuel and material, they go to your captives box, as mandated by the Green Vault law card. You also introduce a new ambition, Eden God, which scores power for the number of fuel and material planets you control. I won this campaign game, partly because before I chose Guardian, I had a pretty strong presence on fuel and material planets, but also because at some point in the past, I was the Founder of the Commonwealth and decided that No, in fact, even this socialist utopia is too corrupt, too obsessed with ambition. That history was still a part of my story. I still had the Commonwealth ambition token, which was pivotal when I declared Edengard as a Commonwealth ambition and shot past in points on the chapter when both Sea Fate players completed their objectives. I had more power than the Overlord, and so I won. The Overlord story was kind of parallel to mine. They too played their first two acts as an A-Fate, the Advocate. Manipulating guild cards and the remainder of the Imperial military power, they managed to fulfill their Fate objectives both times. But instead of protecting the galaxy, they were accruing power for themselves, and in Act 3, their true nature emerged. A tale of intrigue, corruption, and the literal quest for power. And again, their history was their downfall. Advocate revolves heavily around guild cards, and Overlord achieves their objective by outraging every type of planet imaginable. When you outrage a type of planet, you lose the guild cards associated with that planet type, which means their only path to victory was to lose everything they've been carefully curating in the first 2/3 of the campaign. Both of these stories coexisted together in the tangled mess of mechanical interactions Blighted Reach cultivates. It is much more powerful and emergent than anything Twilight Imperium or any other game of that type could throw at you. So much so, making this comparison alone is an act of sacrilege. They don't belong together. They are games motivated by a different purpose. The only reason to compare them is because these are the only viable points of comparison. Arx breaks away from genre. What genre? Well, the genre of Twilight Imperium. How does it do it? By being nothing like it. So they're not really comparable? No! A big discussion point around Blighted Reach was the balance of Sea Fates, the ability to win the game you've been failing at via the disrespect to power accrued. This enshrined mode of victory in BGA is desecrated in BRA. Is this a fair mechanism? Is it balanced? Whatever side you lean on, my question to you is, why are we even talking about this? What is the point of this conversation when the object in question is supremely uninterested in it? There are 24 fates in Arx, each entangled with others, each affecting the metastate of the campaign in profound ways. Furthermore, each fate has different off-ramp points to exit the campaign with different consequences, and multiple fates can be employed by the same player. This is an absurd metagame, so rich that to account strategically or tactically for their impact is impossible. Some people will try inevitably, and it is fun to consider it, but I don't think that's what makes Blighted Reach interesting. It is hard to get Arx to behave, and it is even harder to manipulate it in the campaign mode, which I think gives players the impetus to succeed, to win. The natural expression of play in board games is competition, system mastery, betterment. But what if all these systems are difficult not to pose a challenge, but to sculpt a story? There is a concept in role-playing games called failing forward. The idea that a dice roll shouldn't produce a success or failure binary result because that binary is not really helpful in regards to narrative. I failed to hit a goblin with a sword is less interesting than because I failed to hit the goblin with a sword, they're now running towards the alarm bell. In board games, this is called rubber banding in relation to the term runaway leader, and most conversations around failing without penalty are expressed through this lens of getting a boost if you're doing badly so no player gets too far ahead. Some dungeon crawling board games specifically try to employ failing forward, but somehow always fail because they misunderstand the concept and penalize the players mechanically anyway. They produce a failed state but inject some narrative into it. But the objective of failing forward isn't to narratively flourish a failure, it is to produce alternate outcomes from failure. So the only board game I know of that does definitively succeed at this mechanism is Blighted Reach. There is no strict downside to failing to meet your fate's objective. You do lose out a little, you might be neglected a nifty guild or lore card, but in the grand scheme of things, the penalty is symbolic. The real punishment is that you don't get to play this fate anymore. It is no longer achievable. Narratively and mechanically, you failed your goal. Time to change, cocoon into something else. Maybe much better, maybe much worse. Sea fates are always so drastic, so extreme. They're the ultimate expression of a desperate character so dissatisfied with the status quo that they will break the galaxy to change it. And they're given every tool to succeed, not because of balance or rubber banding. They would simply be not worth telling a story about otherwise. Each fate is an idea of how things should be, and Blighted Reach is a socio-political playground, a simulation of how these ideas clash, the destruction they leave in their wake. There is no psychohistory here, just a myriad of what-ifs that you are at your leisure to embody and indulge.
It was, in a sense, a struggle between free will and determinism.
Given everything we've said, this is an easy parallel to draw. Both works, Foundation and Arcs, are about control over your own fate, but there is a profound difference between them. Foundation does not care to give any society any control. It is bound to a ghost, and all the ghost represents is a fictitious science. Arcs gives you just enough control to impact the big picture, to drive it in your direction. You're never entirely behind the wheel, but your decisions leave an imprint on the tapestry of your story, and when Arcs is at its best, it asks you to sit with what those decisions mean. What is it that you've actually done? Is that good? Do you deserve to feel good? Should the universe be kind to you if you've not been kind to it? This is how I see Arcs and Blighted Reach, and whenever I've tried talking to other people about it, they would stare at me like I told them I boil rocks as a hobby, mostly because I tried to condense what took me 14,000 words in this video into 3 sentences, but I have to, at this point, reckon with that. Love it or hate it, most people don't see Arcs the way I do, and if its intentions are what I believe they are, how do I reconcile this indifference towards its design goals? How do I acknowledge its success and or failure as a fun game when I think its mechanical fidelity is absurd and it succeeds in spite of it rather than because of it? I feel out of step with almost every conversation about Arcs, but I feel in step with Arcs, the game that took an old novel and said, we can probably make some better stories out of this, but also, let's recontextualize an entire genre of board games whilst we're at it. The answer is, I don't have to reconcile anything. Time will do it for me. If Twilight Imperium was Act 1, then Arcs and Blighted Reach are Act 2, a new way forward that will influence other designs to adapt its form and iterate on it in better, more exciting ways. We'll have to live through to Act 3 and only then we will see. That's how generational storytelling works. Over the last year, when conversation with friends landed on Arcs, I would often get asked, do you like it? And my answer would always end up being this non-committal word vomit. So here we are at the end, and I haven't told you yet. How can I? Each and every time I was asked this question afterwards, I would berate myself. Why can't you answer? Just say yes or no. It's easy. Why can't you do it? What's wrong with you? As a reviewer, I feel a complete failure for not being able to basically execute the primary function of what I do. Step 1, verdict. No, can I have a different quiz, please? It took me this whole year of work on this video to figure out not whether I like it, but why I don't know. And the answer to that is the same answer as to why Arcs is like that. In an introduction to her novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula Le Guin wrote, many people who do not read science fiction describe it as escapist, but when questioned further, admit they do not read it because it's so depressing. The idea here is that science fiction is an extrapolation, and taken to its ultimate conclusion, we always end up with either fascism or extinction. In the space of board games, ARX is an advancement from escapism to science fiction. Originally, I was going to call this video Despite Everything, It's Still ARX, in reference to that line from Undertale where the protagonist looks at the mirror and the line says, "Despite everything, it's still you." ARX tells stories, but more importantly, it's a reflection, not of you, but of the story you chose. It says, pick a tale, and then it tells it to you. But it is often not what you think it is. It's sadder than you wanted. And then you find yourself in that story. And then it ends. Wow, you're still here. That's really cool. You watched this really long video, at the end of which I would like to give a couple of thank yous. First of all, to Elaine, who shot all the B-roll in the video. She's not in as many videos, but she shoots all of the B-roll for all the videos. And if you think it looks great, which I do, then shout out to Elaine in the comments. Also, another thank you to the other person at the end of the line on emails at the University of Brockport, who was very patient with me and allowed us to use that footage from the interview with Isaac Asimov. Another thank you to Tom Brewster, whose endless enthusiasm for ARX, and also teaching me ARX, and also teaching me Blighted Reach, and also playing a bunch of games of ARX with me is kind of contributed a lot to this video. I imagine it would be very different without him. So big thanks, Tom. And finally, a big thank you to our patrons who often say to us, we'd really love to see more longer, in-depth, thoughtful, nuanced work. So without you, this wouldn't be possible. And if you'd like to support that kind of work, please go to our Patreon. The link is down below. Final thanks is thank you to this t-shirt, which has been incredibly cozy throughout this very, very long shoot. And if you'd like to get one of your own, the link is also in the description. I would say see you soon, but we're actually going on a holiday, which I feel like after all of this, we deserve a little bit. So see you in August.